Thank you very much. And thanks to you that you joined this talk, even though it's not the most technical talk. And after all, you're starting in a technical track. So I'm even more honored that you're here. My title, the road to fair machine learning models, is I've picked this deliberately. It's still a road. We are not there yet where we want to be, and we are working. Maybe if you read the booklet, you'd see that we are developing a data fairness label. And this label is the first one in production in Switzerland, but it's still a road ahead, and we're still learning a lot, and it's not where we want it to be at the end yet. So when you hear about ethics and fairness and so on in data science and data-driven technologies, these are pictures that you see often in the news. Like you have an over-regularization, you have a lot of laws, you see these data protection laws from the EU maybe, hear a lot of these things. Or on the other side, on the other end, nothing is regulated and you can do everything, you can surveil all people, you have a total control over your people. And I want to start with giving a few examples, 2 examples for each topic, before I will go into the even more interesting part, which lies in the middle, which is concerning us the most actually in everyday life. And I want to explain why these 2 parts, they're not of the main concern. The over-regularization is mostly done by the governments, creating laws, and the total control is happening anyway with large companies, and we are not yet there in a position to stop them effectively. So let's start with a fictional example. I write fictional example, but actually this example in a very similar way happened. But I don't want to blame any company, and that's why I changed it a little bit and made a fictional example out of it. So you all know these riders and maybe read it in the booklet. Let's imagine a large company with a lot of bicycle delivery people. And when you have a large company, you need to have a way to give them a fair salary. So you want to improve your service, and that's why people with a better performance will have at the end a higher salary. So how would you achieve that? And this is actually a model from production, and it's configured in our own software in the BSI customer suite. Last year, I don't know if any one of you attended my talk last year, but then I talked about the application architecture and how we built our AI framework. So for those who didn't, what you see here is the flow chart of a machine learning model, and we have models in here. This one are multi-armed bandit algorithms, and you can train them with reinforcement learning. You can maybe put a rating inside, and these multi-armed bandits then will learn to predict the rating for this particular rider. So when this rider delivers, let's say, a pizza, and will receive an A rating, then here there will be the input of the customer. The customer actually is the rider at this moment, and this rider will receive a rating, and we will measure the delay of the rider, and the second multi-armed bandit algorithm will then learn to predict the future ratings and the future delays for this particular rider. So then we take all this information and we put it into a neural network. So we take the rating, we take the expected delay, now the prediction of the reinforcement learning model, and maybe we take some static numbers like the work hours, how much this rider worked. We put it into a neural network and make a supervised learning problem out of it. We assign with humans some salaries and say for these riders they get higher salary, for these they get lower, and it learns automatically to give new salaries for new riders that come into the system. What we didn't take into account is when this delivery woman has a problem like a flat tire. And then this woman will get a delay, will have a bad rating maybe because maybe the pizza box went to the ground, and so on. And maybe at the next day, she has to repair her bike and also cannot have so many work hours. So what we see is we'll have a poor rating and we'll have a lot of delays, and this will have a direct impact on the salary next month. Depending on how these reinforcement training algorithms are tuned, usually they favor later coming data more than data before. So if this happens by the end of the month, the rider will receive a lower rating. And this is not a made up, the example is a fictional example, but actually this model really exists in production, very similar to this. So this is not a fake. And I don't want to just show the problem, I want to also to give maybe a few pointers on how you can improve this model and what should go into consideration if you want to make this better. And be aware that this may be flawed. This is not a perfect solution, and we didn't think a lot about this. But these are, for me, a few factors that have to come into consideration when you create a fair model that you want to do. So, of course, you still have the performance that comes into it. A person that delivers more has fewer problems also. It's not so bad if there are problems, if a delivery person has a lot of flat tires, maybe he cannot handle his bike as well and has little stones between in between the tires and will, because of bad handling, have a lower performance. So maybe it's not the worst thing, but you have to take into account a lot of other things. Maybe the influence on other employees at the same, other riders, does he talk with them? And now you would ask yourself, how is it possible to put this soft factor that actually has to maybe to be observed by colleagues or so on into a model, maybe by giving ratings or so on for your colleagues. With the sustainability, how long-term your things are, if you buy a new bike, for instance, and so on. All these things you can take into account. Your flexibility maybe should be another thing, customer orientation, if you do something extra for this, and the entrepreneurship. You maybe want to give your riders a possibility to have more interesting models. So I don't want to talk a lot about this topic because it's on one of these fields that I told in the beginning that are not our main focus. But still, I want to show that there's a lot of improvement also for companies that don't care a lot about ethics and more about profit. To put some light on the other side, the over-regularization side, now here I can take a real-world example, not a fictional example, and it has to do with the data protection law of the EU. And here I have another case. It's a flowchart of an application that we developed for the law department of a large insurance company. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to automate the assignment of legal cases that come in to their lawyers. And they have a pool of 140 lawyers, and they have, before we did this automation, they had 2 people that were employed only to do these tasks, to assign new cases that come in, maybe over phone, over email, and so on, and assign it to their lawyers. So what we did is we created an online form. It's a landing page behind this step, and there you can enter a free text, what your problem is, your legal problem. Then we have here an NLP algorithm where we figure out what the content of this problem is. And then we load all of their lawyers, the whole pool of lawyers into this flow and match each one with this specific case and with how much time they have, with how much experience they have with this legal topic and so on. Choose it and then assign it automatically, maybe scan some documents that they also additionally sign in, and then show a result page where they will see which lawyer will be responsible for their case. I want to be a little bit technical. I know this is an interdisciplinary course, but I want to show you what kind of algorithms we use, because I'm actually writing this. We're also developing this technology, so for at least for us, it's interesting. So for here, we used attention-based NLP algorithm. I don't know who of you know Google BERT. A few of you know it. So it's not maybe the cutting edge, but it's the most evaluated attention-based deep learning mechanism for NLP tasks. And to train this model, we used some transcript from German courts of law and trained to assign these cases with it and gained quite a high accuracy. So 96% of the cases, we can assign the case correctly to the topic. So what's the problem with it? We wanted to use their past data to train this model, but the data protection law of the EU, and especially Article 5 of it, says personal data shall be collected for specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes and not further be processed in a manner. And then if you read further, you have here some exceptions to the rule, but it's quite hard to interpret these exceptions. And the people responsible for interpreting these rules for the company by themselves is usually a data protection officer and the team behind this person. And in this case, they decided they cannot use the past data to transfer this into an automated process. So what we first had to do before we collected all this data, we used a static approach where we had static rules. And then at the same time, we collected the data. And to comply to the laws before, we had to inform the customers for this additional use of their data. And because now it's the main use for the data to be able to train the model, we in the future would be able to use it. And the next step then would be to train on this collected data and apply it to the model. And of course, here you can see that there's a clear disadvantage over less regulated jurisdictions. And I told you already the solution that we did at the end. We didn't collect the data. We used already existing transcripts. But this is not always the case. So here we found a way out of this dilemma, but usually you have such things in an over-regulated world. And now with this, I want to show you these two extremes, like this overregulation and the bad big tech companies that collect all your data and so on. And I want to go in this, for me, most interesting case in the middle, where actually most of the companies in Switzerland are, and maybe also in Germany. They already want to be ethical, but often they have a lot of pressure not to be ethical. And let me go a little bit in this detail. There are many different cases what you want to do, and many parts that don't go into the left or right side and are in the middle. And maybe you heard about this transferable ethics. Do you know this case of transferable ethics, just out of interest? So you can tell your robot vacuum cleaner if he should apply your ethics towards animals, for instance, towards insects. If you yourself wouldn't kill insects, you can tell your robot also to do this. So it's just one of these parts that is neither side. Another part is, can you actually trust your models? There's a very interesting paper. It's about an algorithm called LIME. Do you know? I just trying to check out how deep you're into machine learning. Well, so this LIME algorithm is an algorithm that can explain what part of input data, be it text or images or numbers, was relevant for the prediction. So what you do is you exchange a few pixels and see if the outcome changes. And in this particular case, there was a machine learning model that wanted to predict whether on a picture there is a husky or a wolf. And you can see the part that was relevant to say that this picture, actually, which is the husky, was classified wrongly as a wolf, is the part next to it. So when there is a lot of snow, it turned out that a lot of pictures of wolf had snow in the background, and a lot of pictures of huskies didn't. And these algorithms, they found it out. And then you can have a lot of different possibilities how you deal with it. For instance, you can add more data to your training set where there's not snow in the background of a wolf. And there's another topic, and I will combine these topics later on. There's another topic of bias. There are many, many very prominent details, and you can have many more. There's a link towards datascience.com. For instance, Amazon's recruiting tool that did not like women, or maybe these Google photos that tagged African Americans as gorillas. So very bad examples, and unfortunately there are many of them. And actually there are, for all these problems, there are technical solutions. So I already talked about this line paper. That's actually the same paper that I showed before. There is also one on focal loss. So when you teach a neural network to discriminate between two things, and you have more data from one class, more huskies than wolves, and you're not able to collect as many samples for both classes, you can use a different algorithm, a different loss function. Here it's focal loss that can even these two classes out, even though you don't have so much data. So there are no technical excuses for not being fair in a model. And I want to give you, just to make this point more clear, how you can make your models fairer is and reduce bias. I want to give you an example that we did together with a market research company. And we wanted to remove the bias of customer segmentation. So when you have a company and you want to send advertisements or want to handle your customers differently and focus on them specifically, you want to remove all your biases there. And this is very hard because your own customer base is maybe not representative towards the population. Right? If you are in a low price segment, you're missing out all the customers that actually wanted to be in a higher upper class, in a premium segment, and so on. And there is the obvious solution would be to ask the people in the whole population, but because of this over-regularization, this is often quite difficult to do. So market research companies, they're not allowed to mix in their data or to ask directly questions to customers. And here is a possible solution how you can still do this. So what we do is 3 steps. The first step is, let's say we already asked our population, and then we can use we can analyze all the questions that we ask. Usually these are hundreds of questions, so you have interviews of 45 minutes to 1.5 hours per person that you ask questions about and try to find out about their beliefs, about their preferences and so on. And it's not feasible to maybe query this for your existing customers. So what we do first is we identify the 10 most relevant questions that were asked in this market research setting. And then we use a small subset of our customers, ask them these maybe, let's say, 10 power questions. And we try to transfer this behavior onto the whole customer base that we have. And usually these power questions, if you're wondering how they could be, it's something like, how important is a personal advisor to you? And if you want to display all these different settings, these different segments, you can do this in a spider chart and see how they do. And then if you later on want to combine this with your own customer data, you can put them into the same spider chart and see if they are congruent with the whole population. Second thing is you make a very short survey with easy questions that you can answer with a 1 to 5 Net Promoter Score. And the last part is you can transfer this behavior. And actually here, the most relevant question is what attributes of your customer base do you use for this? And for us, the most relevant one is the communication. So if they're complaining, if they're sending emails and so on, then you get the most information out of them, what their beliefs are and what they talk about and the reasoning why they're complaining and so on. And that way, if you do it this way, you removed your bias in your own customer base. You now know that they're representative of the whole population. And usually when you want to do this, maybe with a show of hands, who in here, if you're in a data science team, you want to assign time to these ethical questions and you want to make your models ethical? Could just out of interest, I mean, you came to this talk, so I think most of you, right? Who is not interested in when you're doing a project that you get time from your project manager to actually think about ethical questions? I will reverse the question. Who doesn't? Could you just show of hands? Okay, everybody in here, is that right? Perfect. So that's why we want to come up with this label as a solution. It's this data fairness label. It's actually the first label that is in place in Switzerland. There's no other one so far, but we are also not. We're also in a very early stage, but we wanted to get this out as soon as possible to get as much information and as much use as we can get. And the main 3 points of it is we want to help with disclosing your algorithms, critically examining the basis of your data for possible biases, and also to define digital values in your company. And the start with this is often quite hard, especially if you're a startup. And if you want to read more about it, there's a link. I hope you can see it. It's a bit long, but maybe you can make a photo. So if you're interested about going deeper into this topic. And there is a lot of research. There's a lot of information out of this. You get courses about this. There's a very famous course at the Stanford University from Andrew Ng, where he talks about digital ethics and so on, but also in Switzerland there are many, many courses about it, so this should never be the problem. But the real problems are mostly this, that when you're in a company environment, you have in your project often 2 goals that are not always easily combinable. And the one goal is performance, and the other one is ethics, fairness, sustainability. And for performance, you have a lot of reasons to do this. First, AI is quite a new field, and in the business world, you still want to prove that it actually works. Your project management wants to have a product that is as successful as possible. Your customer is pushing towards this goal. Of course, you have an ambition that you yourself want to have a product that is as good as possible, and sometimes you even have a performance-based salary. So if your project is successful, you can keep your job. If your project is not successful, you have to look for a new job, right? And on the other side, we have a few things from this regulation, but it doesn't cover everything that we have. It doesn't cover biased models, for instance. And maybe have this mindset of data scientists that I showed before that maybe visited the course of Andrew Ng and now are very interested, or you attend talks like this and you think about it. But other than that, you don't have a strong argument. And these arguments, they're usually directly applicable with money. This one too, but the rest is not. So what we want to give is also an option that when your company says, we want to have this data fairness label, that you as a data scientist, you as a project member, or the project managers, and also the C-levels of your company, they have a reason to really invest time to it, to commit to it, and say that you do it. what was important for us when we created the label is that it doesn't dictate to you how you have to have your projects. We don't want to say if your model is biased, then you're not allowed to use it, right? Because in some cases, you want to have a biased neural network to find out how specific parts of the population work differently than others, right? So there are technical reasons why you want to have biased models. So the one very important factor of this label is there are no strict rules. And maybe this is as of now, because maybe the reason might also be that we don't know enough about it so far. But so far there is no basis on really dictating rules. And what we did with this label is, what you have to do is, if you want to bear this label as a company, you have to declare what kind of data you collect and what you do with this, what models you create with this data. And you have to describe it in 2 questionnaires. And I can actually show you these questionnaires. Let's quickly go into the application. So once you're member of Swiss Insights, you get a login and you can manage your questionnaires here. You can add a new one. Let's say. So, and it's created myself. And I can choose here if I want to now declare a model or the data based on the model. Let's go into the model. I can create it. I can also fill it in. I think there was a button directly to fill it in. And the first thing I see is the mandatory questions. There are very few mandatory questions, and these questions are especially relevant if you have person-related data. And you see there are questions about the model bias, and as soon as you go in and you fill it out, more questions will get mandatory while you do it. And there are points about the model impact, the application, points about data set related, but that is based for this model, basic information. Basic information, it means even things like the problem type. This question is mandatory because we want to have statistics about it, what kind of models are used, so that we can possibly help the label bearers to get better with it and to give them information about how our users are. Then we have many more aspects to metrics, to evaluation about it, and quantitative analysis. Most of them are optional. And then, yes, of course, I didn't do all these things, but I don't have to finish it. I just want to show you another one. Let's go into data. For data, it's quite similar, but for data, it's really highly focused on data related to people and sensitivity of data. So because one of the main concerns is that people are treated fairly, right? When it's about ethics, about things, we saw this example with transferable ethics where you can be fair to insects, but our main concern with this label is to be fair towards humans. So that's the main focus on this. So I told you that this label is in a very early phase. We have 3 companies so far that are using it yet, but actually the release will be this January. And what we are aiming for is we don't want to have a label that is greenwashing. Large companies like Facebook coming to us and telling us we want to be now a fair company and we want to handle everything nicely. We couldn't handle this. We just are too small to have a fully audited process. So what we focus on now are companies and startups that are already interested in being a fair company. And with this, if you have more questions, I would be very happy if we could discuss them now, and let's connect and let's stay in touch. And if you're more interested in data fairness, in this label and so on, just write me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
I was pretty surprised about this example with lawyers.
Yeah.
So that you said, yeah, okay, yeah, you can process that. That's I was assuming that legitimate interest of the company would be a valid reason to process, and of course you need to inform people, but it's not like a blocker. Many companies do use statistical data and historical data for any type of many types of analysis. Yeah, and Article 5 is actually only like the description, yeah, so the legal grounds for processing a later.
Right, exactly. And the main part is there is a different interpretation over the companies. It really lies on the consideration of the data protection officer of the company and how they interpret it. And it tends to be that, that's my experience, larger customers of us, like large insurance companies, they tend to be very strict on these rules. And they have also a very high risk because this data protection law in EU is still quite new, and there are not so many court of law decisions made so far, so they want to be extra careful about it. And that's why it happens. What I want, and it's absolutely correct that in other companies they allow it, they allow to do it, but in our particular case, this large German insurance was too afraid to use it because of Article 5.
German is a nice word, because in Germany you also have the worker council who is concerned. Can you use that to disadvantage one lawyer against another lawyer? You also dealt with this problem.
Yes, we had some discussions about it, and there are several cases related to this, but the nice thing about them is you can talk to people. Right? You can go to the council, you can explain them what you want to do, and you can come to terms with them. With a law, you don't have this option.
Mr. Schrem had some good experiences.
You mean with the worker union?
No. It's the Austrian lawyer who filed the claim against Facebook and won it.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah. Of course, I don't want to discredit our law, right? I think we absolutely need to have a law. There is also always a risk, just the concern is that there is a risk of over-regularization with the law. But yes, of course, I mean, there are many good cases, and I hope that the law is as just as possible. Yes, please.
So, just to go back to one of your examples, the one where Facebook, I think it was Facebook, misclassified a video where two black people appeared as gorillas. So actually, because this is not the kind of buyer that has some sort of social background, so to say, it's literally the model not having either enough data or enough features, interpretation methods to detect it. So what do you do? Because I cannot think of many things besides perhaps restricting the search space so that it literally doesn't allow to label a video as gorillas or something like that.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and actually, you know, it's if you see these two sides in the very beginning that I have, it's clearly on this side, and it's not the side. It was the first part of the presentation, which is not our main focus, and where we don't want to apply our label yet. But I think the solution just would be to be careful with exactly sensitive topics. And actually, the company was Google, and I think a company as large as Google, it could be Facebook as well, of course, but a company in that size, they really have the resources to do it. It's a management decision usually if you apply the resources there or not. It's usually not a technical problem, but an organizational one. Because if you have enough time, and if you and Google by themselves, they do some research on ethics, they do some research on what are sensitive topics, and by the law also they have to do that. So there it's just a question of how much money you spend to fighting these topics.
What are your customers main concerns when you come to them and say, oh, we have here cool AI or ML models? Yeah? What do they usually like come with before they say, okay, check it out?
It's actually very rarely ethical topics. So usually it's about money, and it's about what you usually with machine learning you can automate a lot of processes, right? And you can say, okay, right now there is manual labor part of it, and if we introduce this new model, then we can get rid of the manual labor, and then they can see how the costs are, our estimates to implement such a model, and they compare these two factors with each other and decide for more money. That's usually the usually the case where to do it. Sometimes it's also interest. Sometimes it's also that companies want to go into they usually call it a new world, right? When they want to enter the 21st century and want to make their first steps with it, and then it's also some sort of research fund that they use for it, and then they're usually much more open to do it. But in 90% of the cases, it's just money who dictates it. But on the other hand, the companies usually are very happy if we show them that we ourselves support this label, we help developing this label, and we want to be part of it and want to introduce AI, but in an ethical way for this company. So I think it's usually for us, it's a plus to have it. Any more questions? Would you like, just out of interest, if you would be a decision maker in a company, would you like to use such a label? Do you think it's too early to use it yet? Do you think there are flaws in it? So who would like to introduce it? I'd say about half. Okay, thank you.
Isn't it very, hard to kind of weigh the importance of how good your model is versus how ethical you are?
Yes, it's yes and no. I would say sometimes it's like that, but I think one of the very interesting aspects of data scientists is that they're very creative people. And when you give them more opportunity to think about it, sometimes it's even the case that they come up with even better solutions that are fair. So if you're allowed to spend more time and analyzing the problems, maybe you discover aspects of the problems that you didn't see before. And by discovering these aspects, you even have the possibility to improve your model. So sometimes the model performance really goes down. It's really this case that you say, but I think most often it stays about the same. You find a different solution to do it. And sometimes, and I think it's even the majority, the model gets better because you think about more aspects. And maybe that was my biggest misconception when I came after starting into a company and started my first machine learning projects. I always thought in the beginning that machine learning is about choosing the best hyperparameters of my deep learning model and then applying it to the problem. But actually, the biggest work is the exploratory data analysis that you have before. And when you're doing a better data analysis, you have a better model at the end. And it doesn't matter so much what model you use. And these ethical considerations, they also help you with this data analysis in the beginning. And this will usually lead to a better performance at the end. Yes, please.
One question for these questionnaires evaluated. Do you want to prove some of the...
We are so far not so far. You have to go yourself, and we are relying to the willingness of doing ethical considerations. We pick some specific ones out and look at them. Usually we ask before if we're allowed to do that, or we at least tell in the beginning. But we are also working on an auditing process later on that we can apply, and we're not sure yet how to do this. So far, Swiss Insight is too small to do this for all submitted forms. But some particular ones we pick out and look. If we think this is a risky topic, something like this, then we look at it. But we don't do it consistently overall. Yes?
There are usually two problems with such new labels. One problem with this particular is if you describe your algorithms, you need to see that you don't expose too much IT so that the competitors can copy that.
Exactly.
So you kind of, you will be sparse in describing, and you need to find a balance. And the second one with new labels, especially regardless of the topic, you need kind of like a level of leverage so that people will see the label, recognize it, and say, oh, that's a cool company because they're trustable. How do you plan to promote it? It's a soft attribute.
I think both points are very good points and very relevant. So the first point that you said is how do we cope with not exposing too much information? And I think this was really the design of the questionnaires that went into it. We really wanted to prepare some sort of checklist for project members that they think about all possible processes. But for instance, when you have to describe your algorithms, you usually say it's supervised learning, deep learning algorithms. You don't go into more detail than that. So this went into consideration. And the second part is we have a lot of influential people in our strategic board, in our board member, and they're working in companies, usually in Switzerland, where they get into contact with a lot of possible bearers of the label. And when we do presentations, when we show our software, we often add a slide to it and say, by the way, there is this label and you can also do it. And we had quite good response for it. So we don't do a huge marketing campaigns. And maybe I skipped it in the last slide. This label is maybe I didn't even. I have it in a picture actually. So the question, who we want to address with it, it's you can address either businesses or end customers, and we are not at this space yet where we want to make it publicly known. So we don't want to inform every Swiss citizens about this label and that you can choose the insurance that has the label or not. But we want to convince companies that they self-declare by themselves that they want to do it. So it's a B2B label, not a B2C label. Yes, please.
How much does it cost for this label?
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. I'm not sure if I have all the numbers in hand, but it depends on how large your data science department is. And I think it starts with something like 3,000 a year up to maybe 12,000, 15,000 a year. And later on, if we go into fully audited process, it might get more expensive. We have this option. But I would say for a large company that has maybe a small data science team, it's very easy it's almost the expenses that you have, food or something like this. Quite cheap. It's really the more expensive part for the companies is the time spent, the time, the effort that it will bring into. And we really hope that they, as I told before, that they will they will also improve their models by applying the label. Any more questions?
Did you wake up in the morning and say, okay, I want to be part of or do this label?
I didn't. The answer is I didn't. It sort of came to me. So I was always interested in. I wanted to be part of the good people, right? Not of the bad people. If I do machine learning, and there's a high risk when you are applying machine learning that you do it for something. Maybe you reduce jobs and they don't have another job opportunity or something like this. So there's a high risk that you will do something bad to people. So I was interested in it, but actually they came to me and asked me if I want to be part. So the organizations with Insights exists for a long time already, and it is based for market. It was a long time the Association in Switzerland for Market Research, and market research right now is a little bit on the decline. So there are less and less companies hiring market research agencies. And one possible solution is to invest more into AI. And this Swiss Insights, they already had a label before for market research agencies. You know that you don't have these annoying ones that call you in the night or several times and want to sell you a new insurance, that they wanted already to separate themselves from this part, and that's why they already created a label of them. And right now, most of the well-known market research companies are part of it. And now they want to go into, because what you do is actually data science, right? You analyze clusters, you segment people, you have your regression and classification models that you do. So they already did data science. So the next logical step would be into going into more deep learning, more AI, and so on. And I was in this field, and that's why they came to me. Well done. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Christoph. Another applause for Christoph Bräunlich.